说到简报，我们不能不提到简报的设计。TED Talk 的 Chris Anderson 就跟大家说了 Having no slides at all is better than having bad slides. 所以当我们一定要用 PowerPoint 的时候，简报的外观就格外的重要。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管双语沟通力的 Podcast。我们希望带给大家最实用的沟通工具，包括了成功人士对全球市场的分享、职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。Hi, I'm Sherry, founder of Executive Plus. As a language trainer and certified coach, I've trained hundreds of managers from Fortune 500 companies such as Dior, Google, Deloitte, and Yahoo.
And I'm Nick, Director of Communication Strategy at Presentality.I've helped startups raise millions of US dollars in funding and train the executives of publicly listed companies to present on the global stage.
Welcome to the Executive Plus podcast,
where you can take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast.Today, Sherry's going to continue sharing with us tips and tricks from the Chris Anderson TED Talk book. We're going to look a little bit into design tips from the TED stage. And then I'm going to share something that my partner Andrew has worked on to help people avoid a common PowerPoint design mistake.
那其实简报的设计来讲，虽然我知道很多人并不是想说 OK 我一定要上 TED Talk，但是 TED Talk 跟简报来讲，它其实有很多是相同性。这种 PowerPoint slides， 我相信大家现在是做简报的时候，你一定会有 PowerPoint slides， 不管多长的简报都一定会有。但是当你要想，在书上它就有提到说，你如果可以想说，简报上面 PowerPoint 上面的 information 跟你所讲的 information 是两种不同的方式同时进行。所以观众他必须他的大脑会无意识下他会决定他要专注在哪一边，是看还是去听。所以你的整体的简报设计的时候呢，跟你所要讲的话变成你一定要好好的来做一个整体的设计，因为你要想说那个观众他可能必须要分配他的注意力。 So today I just really want to share some really easy tips on what things to do and what things to avoid. 那当然我们也要欢迎 Nick 分享一下他的专业，因为其实他跟 Andrew 对于简报的设计跟这种故事的设计都是他们的专业。The first thing that I saw in the book, that I read in the book, it said something that you absolutely need to do is that when you're finished talking about your point, so 我相信大家应该都有这样的经验，当你在讲一个简报，你这个 slide, 你的这个重点讲完，你要进入到下一个重点的时候， The book says don't stay on the slide when you're actually done talking about it.This
is a really simple trick that actually most people don't think about or don't do. Actually, if you're using Microsoft PowerPoint, there are two really simple tricks. You don't need to put in a blank slide inside your PowerPoint in order to stay on the blank slide. Actually, if you just press B on your keyboard, the screen will go black. If you press W on your keyboard, the screen will go white.This is really great, especially when you're doing internal presentations and you're sharing a lot of data. One thing that happens, and I've been in these kind of presentations a lot, is someone will put a lot of data points up on the board, and then they will move on to the next point, and they will leave like that Excel sheet or all those data points. Well, what happens is your audience is not listening to whatever your next point is. Even if you think it's super important, if there's a lot of data on the screen, people's attention will still be reading things on the screen, even if it's not important. So one is visually, you don't need to have as much data on a screen. But two, even if you need to have a lot of numbers or you need a lot of information on the screen, the moment you're done talking with it, you need to move on.Because even if you verbally move on, people's attention span will not come with you. Put a blank slide, that's the easiest, or use a simple shortcut like B or W on your keyboard and it'll just wipe out the screen and then you can press B again and then move on.
所以就是简单的来讲，就是在我们的 keyboard 上面点一个 B, turn to black, or W turn to white. Another thing that the book actually talked about is things to avoid. 那我觉得这个蛮有意思，其实我通常没有去想到这几点。那第一个就是说 avoid using more than one color for your fonts unless you want to make a point. 最好就是 stick with 一种颜色，当你的字体就最好就是一种最主要的颜色。那如果当然你要 highlight 一些重点，你再用另外一个比如说 contrasting 的颜色，那你千万不要说用太多不同的颜色，因为变成大家都不知道哪一个才是重点。 I think I see this a lot is on certain graphs. On a lot of graphs, they would do like 5 or 6 or 7 different colors.
Right, and I think it's because they want to contrast the difference between all these things. But this is also going back to our first point, which is you only need people to pay attention to one thing at a time. So you don't need all the information on there, or you don't need every line graph to have 5 different colors, because the reality is you're not going to talk about most of those lines.
Right.
Especially you're not going to talk about it all at once. You're just going to highlight one thing. When it comes to colors, the standard thought process would be at maximum, your PowerPoint should have only 3 colors. You should have a headline color, because if you're doing things right and you're bringing people's attention to a main idea, the headline will be one color. Your text should be another color. And any key point that you want to make should be a 3rd color. And that's it. You don't need each key point to be in different color schemes. You don't need all the other things. And most of the time, your colors are not going to be very, very different. So for example, by default, your text is probably black or some kind of darker gray. Then your headline and your highlight color should be somewhat similar to each other. So for example, if my main company color is blue, probably my headline is dark blue and my highlight color is light blue. So I have dark blue, light blue, and black. Like those are 3 colors, and for your entire PowerPoint, that's enough.
Oh, okay. I see. 所以不要一下红色啊，一下
Yeah, I don't
红色
need like yellow and orange and red to highlight, plus like random purple headline. It's unnecessary. The easiest thing that we typically do when we're making professional PowerPoints is just take the company's colors or the company's logo's colors and then incorporate them in. And then probably your headlines are your main company colors, and then we'll choose one contrasting color for a highlight. So it's a lot of times medical companies like blue. Blue is a very common company color for medtech. And then either a green or an orange is a highlight. Not green and orange, green or orange to highlight.
All right, so now there's another thing that things to avoid, okay, 要避免的事情，那这个我真的觉得很有意思，那我一定要来好好的问问 Nick 为什么，也就是书上讲说 avoid using bullets and dashes, 但是我常常用 bullets, so I'm really surprised, so I have to ask, why not?
It's kind of an evolution thing. Most of the time we tell people you cannot put a paragraph of information on your PowerPoint slide. So people's next step is like, okay, if I can't put a whole paragraph for people to read, I'll just make like 5 bullet points. That's basically my paragraph just broken down into 5 bullet points. So the idea is those are the same thing. Yeah, bullet points are a little bit easier, but you're not actually condensing your information. You're not actually breaking it down. So in reality, bullet points just become a cheat code that you use to take your full text. But what people actually need to do is break it down even further and go, what is the main point? Because on a TED stage or in a company presentation, you're still to the idea that they should listen to you first. They should look at your PowerPoint second, which means your PowerPoint doesn't need to have as much information as you. You have more information. You're trying to get rid of the bullet point or the dash situation. It's back to PowerPoint fundamentals, presentation fundamentals, which is if someone reads this paragraph, not all of it's important. In fact, there's probably only one idea and maybe a few supporting details that are important. So the first thing you need to do is look at your paragraph and decide what's the main point. If they can only remember one thing from this entire slide, what is that?
So you're saying that, let's say I have 3 bullet points. I need to think about what is the main point out of the 3. 在这3个 bullet point 的重点，其中一个才是我真正的重点。Is that correct?
Right, because if all 3 are equally important, then all 3 should have their own PowerPoint slide. Right? If all of these are critical for my audience to remember, why am I putting them together? Unless it's a summary slide, unless it says, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about A, B, C. But in reality, if I look at you and go, everything on this PowerPoint is critically important to your job, don't mash them together. Talk about one, talk about why it's important. Then go to the next slide, talk about that point and why it's important, because it's easier to remember.
Okay.
It's almost like the idea that if I gave you a grocery list of 25 items and I put them on one slide and I expected you to remember all 25 and go to the grocery store, that's actually kind of difficult to remember all that. But if I gave you a grocery list and I broke it into categories, I said, here's all the important dairy products that you need to buy. Here's all the important vegetables that you need to buy. You'll actually have an easier time remembering the vegetable list and the dairy product list rather than one list of 25. So it's the same. If I have a critical point, I don't mash 10 critical points together. I break it down to say, critical point, why is it critical? Next slide, critical point, why is it critical?
Okay, so you mentioned that 我们刚刚就是要先了解说这个 slide 的重点，一个重点在哪里。Okay, so what's next?
Once you've decided what that key point is, delete the rest of your paragraph.
It's all my hard work.
Yeah, well, your hard work will still come out of your mouth. It just doesn't need to be on your slide.
所以很多学生你知道都会觉得说他怕自己讲不好。They're really afraid that they may not be able to convey that through their mouth, so they want to put it on the slide. 那你有什么 suggestions?
Well, but that's a practice thing, right? I mean, it's the same thing when you learn a bicycle. That's be like, well, I could fall down if I take the training wheels off. So I'll just never take off the training wheels until I'm 50. Right? No one wants to be the 50-year-old riding around with a bicycle with training wheels on it. So it's the same with your presentation. If you're giving yourself an easy way out of it by having the whole paragraph out of there, you'll never become the presenter you want to be because you're not creating a situation in which you need to improve. You're creating a situation in which you can continue doing what you want to do. So the first thing should be practice giving your presentation with no slides, or practice everything else on that page, just delete it. And then the pressure of being clear will be on you, and you will have to figure out how to take that pressure forward. So first thing you do is just delete it. For example, if I was to say, a good TED Talk should offer new value, new insight to the audience, something that they've never heard before. If people already know it, why do they need to listen to you? Right? That's a whole paragraph. And I could write that on a slide and my 3 other bullet points about what makes a good TED Talk. And then people will just read it. I can email it to them. I don't need to go to the presentation. But the whole point of this paragraph is that a good TED Talk should offer new value. I can just have the phrase, offer new value, and just delete everything else. And then it's my job to explain, what do I mean, offer new value?
Okay, so 我们把不需要的全部都删掉了. We deleted all the stuff that we don't really need. And we practice. So what's next?
So this is the last thing you should do. And unfortunately, it's the first thing most people do. But the last thing you should do is, once I've decided my key idea, I can now think about, is there a photo or an icon or a picture that represents my idea better than a bunch of words?
所以这个跟平常我们在做 PowerPoint 准备的时候其实是相反的 order.
Yeah, a lot of people will go, man, I want to have a picture about this.
对。
and then they'll Google search for like 20 minutes for the perfect photo, and then they'll put it on their slide, and then they'll think about, okay, what text do I want to put on this? But your thought process should be the opposite. Your thought process should be, what's the key point that I want to make? Okay, how do I say that as succinctly and as short as possible? Okay, now that I have shortened it, what visual would strengthen my point?
所以其实我们要想的这个顺序是，第一个你先了解说自己的重点在哪里，第二个你要 highlight 这个重点，第三你把其他全部都卡掉，全部都删掉，第四你才会去想说我要用什么样的 image， 什么样的图片啊、照片啊、任何的 icon 去代表我这个的重点。
And what you'll be resulted with is, again, a short phrase with your key point and that background visual that is powerful. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's just a TED Talk thing. You can't do that in corporate presentations. We help people do that all the time. But if you do it incorrectly, and I see people do it incorrectly all the time where they go, this is a good visual. Let me find some fun text and then I'll tell a story. And then in the end, your visual and your text and your story are not that well connected because you went in the wrong order. You tried to build a story based on your picture. But it should very much be the opposite, where you have your key idea, then you break down the key point of the text, and then you find a visual.
那因为我们是 podcast 嘛，大家可能没有办法看到我们所想讲的这种简报的设计。So do you think we could have some examples for our listeners?
Yeah,
what it's supposed to look like?
If people go to our Facebook after they listen to this episode, we'll actually have a post with a link to a downloadable where you can see exactly how this works in action. And this is a visual that my partner Andrew had made 5-6 years ago, and it's still
relevant,
a perfect and relevant example of how you can do this without any kind of design skill. Like, you don't need to be a professional PowerPoint designer or to have that skill in order to do what he shows you, and your deck will turn out 100 times better.
所以不要忘记每周四我们晚上的8点的时候都到我们的粉专主管英文 Executive Plus 的粉专，我们会将所有的那个礼拜的 podcast 的任何的讲义啊 handout links 全部都会在上面。 So you're gonna get that. So just, make sure you go and visit our Facebook page.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
如果你喜欢我们的 podcast， 欢迎来追踪我们的主管英文 Executive Plus 的 Facebook。 那也可以写信到我们的信箱 yourcareerplus@gmail.com。